So today we're going to be talking about some advanced options inside of filters and local adjustments. And it's not going to be a crazy long webinar. I really just want to break it into kind of two parts. The first part being blending modes. If you're not sure what blending modes are, they're a really awesome way to blend certain effects and layers onto your images, pull out certain tones without modifying any of the exposure. They're a really cool tool for photography. So we're going to start off with blending modes, and then we'll move on to the Apply To menu. And the Apply To menu is not crazy complicated, but it can be a bit confusing with some of the filters and local adjustments. So we're going to dive into that at the end, but let's get started here first with blending modes. So with blending modes, there's 5 kind of blend modes that I think everyone should at least have a basic understanding of, and that's multiply, screen, overlay, and soft light, but overlay and soft light are kind of similar, hue and color, which are kind of similar as well, and then luminosity. So that's 7, but they're kind of all similar a little bit. So let's jump in here and we'll take this photo here. So the first one we're going to talk about is the multiply blend mode. Now the multiply blend mode is kind of a complicated blend mode if you actually read the description. We're going to break it down really simply for this webinar. So the first blend mode we're going to talk about is multiply. Now the multiply blend mode darkens your image. It's the only thing you need to know about the multiply blend mode right now is that it's going to darken your photograph. So if you have a kind of blown out image and you don't want to go in and modify the exposure or whatever circumstances there is, you just want to use this blend mode. It's a really easy to blend mode just to take down the exposure of your photo. So let's go into the effects tab, and you can use this with layers, you can use this with filters, you can use this with local adjustments. Anywhere you can use the blending modes, you can use this multiply blend mode. So I'm going to first show you it on a filter. So just add a filter, and then we'll add a curves filter. I typically like using the curves filter for blend modes. And the reason being is because when you add a curves filter, it's not going to do anything to your photograph. So you basically have a blank slate here for your image. Well, once you add a blend mode to this kind of null filter, null being it's not doing anything. So once I go in here and I add, oh, sorry, we need to go, let's back up and how to get to the blend modes. So now that I've added this kind of null filter onto my image, if I want to just use this filter to darken things on my shot, I'm going to use my blending options. Now to access my blending options, I just go into this little gear icon here. So this little gear icon right there, and it lives, you know, in your effects tab right here. It lives in your curves. It lives up in your layers right there. So it's just that little gear icon, and that gear icon is where you're going to access your blending options. So for this curves filter, I'm going to go into my gear icon here. Now I have my blending options right there. You can see that. So in my mode, I'm just going to go to the mode, and there's a ton of different modes here. There's all these different blend modes. Again, we're only really focusing on 5 or 7, but the 2 auxiliary ones that we're going to talk about are kind of similar. So, excuse me, let's go up to multiply. So remember, multiply is going to darken your image. So if I go to multiply, boom, it immediately darkens my photograph. So all I have now is this curves filter with literally nothing applied to it, and the blend mode at multiply. So I have a darken kind of filter here. So if I turn this off and on, you can see it's doing an awesome job just darkening things up. It's removing some of the bright highlights. I can kind of see through this window now. Well, in this curves filter, because I haven't done anything to the filter yet, I still can control some of the tonalities just by modifying these tones. So with a tone curve, if you're not familiar, it works really simply. The bottom left area is your black point. And then as we move up the kind of graph or the tone curve, it just gets brighter and brighter. So we have our blacks down here. And then as we move up, we got our kind of shadow tones right there. And then the mid tones. And then we have our kind of highlights and then our whites. You can also see this represented here over to the left with this little bar. You can see it's black at the bottom and then it's white as it goes up. That's just telling you that's your tone curve going up. So with this tone curve, now that I've darkened things a bit, well, if I don't like how the tone curve is making this look, well, I can actually brighten things up if I want to. So if I want to add in more midtones, I can just put a point there on my shadows and put a point here on my highlights. So those are constant, and then I'll drop a point here on my midtones, and then I'll just pull it up a little bit. And you can see I'm boosting my midtones a hair. Let's make it a little bit stronger. Let's move these up a little bit. But now if I pull up on my midtones here, see how I still have control of that filter even though I have that blending mode applied to it. So if I do want to come back and maybe add in a little more highlight tone or shadow tone, or I want to pull up on the blacks a bit, I still have that ability even though I've added in that blending mode. So with the multiply blend mode, you can do a lot of things. So let's go to a different photo here. Let's grab this shot. Again, just kind of a brighter photo. And so what you can do is you can add different filters onto it and it'll apply that filter, but then once you apply the blend mode, it'll incorporate that blending as well. That kind of sounded confusing. But so let's go in here and we'll add a LUTs filter. So we got kind of this style going on. Well, now let's go into our blending modes and we'll go to multiply. So now we have our blue LUT added on. We've kind of blued the city down a bit. It looks a bit more vibrant, if you will. Well, now on this LUTs filter, I can turn this off and on, and I'm darkening things a bit as well. So with that darkening, I'm also applying the LUT filter. So you can still apply blending modes on top of the filters and so on and so forth. You're not really restricted to just that blend mode when you're applying it to the filter or the local adjustment. And you can do the same thing with local adjustments. So if I go over here and I use like a gradient. So if you want to use like a gradient to mask out this sky area, we'll just use, it's already set to darken. So we'll just see how that looks with darken, and then we can use the multiply to kind of increase the darkening. So if I hold down Shift and hit K, that's going to grab me my adjustable gradient. So now if I drop this down here, I'll just flip this around so it's kind of just on the sky like that, and then we'll just drag this down a little bit. So now we can see it's darkening that sky a little bit. Well, if I go over to my local adjustment and I go into my blending options and I go to my mode, if I go and I use a blending mode, let's say multiply, it's only going to darken that area that I mask. So this is a really easy way if you want to darken areas around like a portrait or a really intense sky. Especially if you're masking out like a really, really blown out sky, you could use, we'll get into it later on in the video, but you can use like the overlay blend mode, which adds in contrast, and kind of just do the same approach. So yeah, that's the multiply blend mode. Again, just darkens things up. So if you need just a quick little darkening or a little increase in your darkening for your filter, local adjustment, whatever it may be, go for the multiply blend mode. You could also use like a different layer. So one thing you could do, this is kind of a fun way to do it as well, is you could go to your layers here. And so we'll just rename this base. So we have our base photo, right? Well, now let's use our base photo duplicated as our control layer for the look of our shot. Everything's non-destructive in Photo Raw anyway, but when you start playing with Photo Raw enough, you kind of come up with just little creative ways to start modifying stuff. So with this layer, I'm going to right click it, and then I'm going to duplicate that layer. Don't show me that again. So now I have this base copy. I'll just rename it control. So with this control layer, I'm going to go up to my blend mode and I'm going to choose multiply. Now that's blending that extra layer on top of my base layer. So my control layer now is blended with that multiply blend mode, darkening things up. So now I can use my control layer with that blend mode. And if I go into my develop tab, I can modify, you know, my exposure, my contrast, and all of this is only applied to that control layer. Nothing is applied to my base layer yet. So I can really use this to really just see what it looks like. So if I go in here and let's just pull up on the midtones a bit, we'll add in some blacks, add in some structure, and then let's just cool it off a bit, maybe like that. So now I can see, oh, that looks okay. That's not bad, but I can always go up here to my opacity and I'll just lower this a bit, and I can kind of control that control layer or that look on my shot. And I can always go back in and add stuff to this control layer. So if I want to add an effect, I could add maybe a vignette or something. Oh, not vintage. Although that didn't look too bad. But you know, you could add a vignette here. And so it's just all applied to this one layer up there that has the blend mode. So it's blending all of that on top of your base layer. Again, multiply darkens things up. So that's the first blend mode that I think everybody should have just kind of a general knowledge of. Again, I would definitely look at, I hate seeing Adobe site, but they invented them. So Adobe site has all of the blend modes there. If you're on a computer, just maybe Google like multiply blend mode, how does it work? And you'll see what I'm talking about with the definitions. They're really intense, but because of the complexity of how these looks are achieved, it's really easy to use these to blend things in with other photos and such. So I'm going to move these, and we're going to talk about the screen blend mode. Multiply darkens your image as a blend mode. Screen is going to brighten your image. Multiply darkens, screen brightens. So if I go and I do the same thing as we did earlier, I add a filter, I'll add a curves filter. In this tone curve, nothing is being applied, nothing is happening. Hit the \K on my keyboard. There's a little lens correction, but nothing else. So in this curve, if I go into my blending modes with the gear icon again, I'll go to my mode, I'll just go up and I'll go to screen. Boom. The screen blend mode just brightens things up. It brightens your image. So if multiply darkens, screen brightens. They're kind of the opposite of each other. And this is really helpful when you're doing like double exposures and things like that, which I think that's going to be the next webinar, is just kind of more advanced techniques with like masking and this stuff. So the last week's webinar was selective editing and masking. So now we're moving on to kind of the advanced options with filters and blending. So you can kind of use all these and then, you know, really create a style for yourself with composites and creative editing. So screen brightens. So with the screen blend mode, again, you can use the curves filter kind of method, and then you can control, you know, like the shadows and your highlights a bit better. And then I don't really have much going on here, but I have a little bit of a cinematic vibe. And then if I turn this off, you can see that curves filter with that screen blend mode applied does a whole lot to the shot. And that's just by using that, again, just that blend mode. So we can do the same thing again with local adjustments. And this is where it's nice with masking. So we're going to mask on a little bit of this, but we're just going to mask it on the areas that we want to. So we're going to go in here and I'm going to reduce the exposure, or take the exposure back to 0 so we're not actually applying anything. And then I'm going to use my blending mode. I'm going to go to screen. And so nothing is applied because with local adjustments, you have to apply something for it to be seen, because in masking, white reveals and black conceals, and we have black right here, so we're not seeing anything. So well, let's just invert this so you can see what's going on. So if I invert that, I can see that it's brightening things up. I have nothing going on in this local adjustment, but this screen blend mode. So with this local adjustment, because I can easily mask it on selectively, I can use kind of an anti-vignette to just bring out the tones around our model here. So I'll just, again, hold down Shift. I'll hit K on my keyboard. I'll go up to my gradients, and I'm going to choose center, I believe. So I'm just going to choose the center shape, and that's going to make sure that the mask is applied inside, or that the effects is applied inside of the mask. So I draw, so it's edges. So I need edges. Sorry, I get those two mixed up a lot. But so edges will apply the adjustment or filter inside of the mask, whereas center will apply it outside of the mask. Okay, so now that we have our edges shape drop down here, with this kind of gradient now, I can just use these little handles, and I'll just make it a little bit smaller. And then I'm just going to kind of put it right towards her face, and then I'll make it even more long. Maybe not like that. Want a little more width. There we go. Just kind of silhouetting around her. And we don't need to have this very strong, but what we're going to do right now is we're just going to feather this a ton, kind of like that. And then what we can do is we can always go back to this adjustment. We can lower the opacity of that adjustment. We can also, again, play with any of these things in the adjustment. So if I want to add a little more contrast or less contrast, I'm going to go in here and add just maybe a little more mid-tone boost like that. Add a little bit of white so it's more realistic. And so you can really get kind of a nice, subtle look by using these blend modes on top of different adjustments within the filter or, you know, that layer or whatever you're using. And then I can, you know, come in here and I'll maybe just increase the temperature of hair. It'll give it a little bit more color on her. And so now with just this local adjustment, if I turn this off and on, I mean, we basically have set all of the tonality for the shot just by using that one local adjustment. And then I can always go back, I can always go back into my develop tab and I could use, I could modify any of these tonality sliders if I want to. I could use AI match. So it's just kind of, the world is your oyster when it comes to these blend modes. They're really fun to use. They're super, super great at like making natural looking shots. So just start playing with them. Okay, so now we're moving on to overlay. And that's the contrast one I was kind of talking about earlier. Let me see if are there any questions before I move on to overlay and soft light. Oops. So Richard asked, why not use darken instead of multiply? They do different things. So if I go up to this photograph, and we go in here, we'll add a filter. We'll add a curves filter. So if we go in here and we go to the darken blend mode, it's not going to do anything. If you're looking for kind of an in-depth course about blend modes, we did one a few months back. It was like this mini course, and we went over, I think, 10 of them. Really in-depth, I think darken is one of them. I'll add a link to that on this video, but that has a more, way more in-depth about each blend mode. This is just kind of these ones: multiply, screen, overlay, soft light, hue, color, luminosity. But again, darken does different things than multiply. I know that's kind of confusing. Darken seems like it would be the one that darkens things, but they do different things. But good question. Thanks for the question. If you're curious on what these blend modes do, again, they're really complex things. So if you're kind of wondering which one specific one does, just Google it. Google that blend mode, what it does, and I'm sure it'll have kind of a definition for you. So Larry asks, what was the point of using in the control layer? What would you do with the base layer after you can create the control layer? So the control layer was basically just the layer that I'm going to use to make all the modifications to that base photo. It's just another way to kind of have a different control of the opacity of those. You can blend things in a little bit more subtly. So for example, with this photograph, if I take the blend mode off and we go to our develop, I don't know why I can't see my layers. Oh, gotta open them. So I'll duplicate this layer, right? And so we have our base layer. Actually, yeah, we'll just do it. It doesn't matter. So then we have our control layer. And so what I could do here is I could go into my blend modes. I could multiply this to make it dark, and then I could make it incredibly dark. But then I could pull up on my whites a little bit. And now, because I have this control layer, I can always revert back to the shot immediately. I can always see what that original photo looks like without actually going down and modifying or going into my local and turning this off or going to my develop and turning this off. I can kind of see my original. Well, I guess you can do that with preview after, but I don't know, it's just another way to like have another little, just a little more control on your shot, I guess. And everybody does things differently. So just kind of up to you on how you want to use these blend modes, but sometimes I'll just go in here and add a couple layers, and then I can see what each different layer does to my shot. Like it can add, I can duplicate this, I'll reset this entire layer, or I'll turn that back to normal, and I can turn this off. I'll rename this one, and we'll just do overlay for this one. So I can see what this looks like with overlay or soft light, which it doesn't look that great, but it's, again, just another kind of extra layer of control with your image. Yeah, you can do it a different way too if you wanted to go in here and actually modify, your develop tab separately and then do the effects of the blend mode. But I just found that this way, it just makes everything a little bit more blended, and I can always go back and again, lower the opacity to that layer really quickly. Oh, this layer. But again, just personal preference for editing. Okay, so let's move on here. Just reset. So I'm going to close out all these layers. Okay, so now we have soft light and overlay. Oh wait, let me just show you this screen again. Just one other example. So screen also, again, brightens things. So it's really awesome for just like dark scenes like this. And what you can do with it is just apply it selectively. So with this, we know we kind of want this middle area with that kind of same exposure. So what we can do is in here we can go into our effects tab. We can add a filter. I'll add the curves filter again, kind of my control null layer, null adjustment layer, if you're familiar with After Effects. But I'll just rename this screen gradient. And so now I'll go in here, I'll use my screen blend mode. So I can see it brightens things up. I don't really like how bright it got in the middle. So I'll just hit M on my keyboard. That's going to grab me my masking bug. Now with my masking bug, I'm going to go to my shape. I can go to reflected gradient, and that will reflect the mask on both sides. And so if I drop this down here, I can kind of flip this. I'll just angle it how I want it. Maybe, blend those out a little bit, feather those. And then I'll just go to my screen gradient here. I'll go to the masking. Remember that white reveals, black conceals. So you can see that we're revealing this onto these areas. So we want this opposite, so we'll invert this. Oh, wait. No, sorry, we had it right. So now we had the white on the right side. So if we look at this, we're keeping the tonality in the middle while we're brightening the sides on the left and the right, if that makes sense. So with this reflected gradient now, because I have those whites everywhere outside of the middle, I'm protecting the middle. And if I turn the soften on, that's only applied to this area to the right and to the left. And again, I can go in here. I can kind of make that less faded. Maybe make this a little smaller. There we go. Maybe like that. So now it's a little bit more natural. But then we have a little more even scene. And that's just by using that, again, screen blend mode and then a gradient mask. So blend modes just kind of save you a lot of time. If you want just a quick adjustment to things, you don't really have to go in and modify any tonality sliders or anything. You just screen, brighten things up, multiply, darken things up. Yeah, so that's screen. All right, so move on to soft light and overlay. Overlay and soft light are similar. They're very, very similar blend modes. Overlay and soft light are in the contrast category of blend modes. That means they're going to create contrast within your scene. So if I go and do my little curves technique, I add a curves filter and I'll go to my blending options, I'll go to my mode, and now let's go to overlay. So if I go to overlay, you can see it's adding in contrast. It's not brightening things up. I mean, contrast brightens things up, adding in white, but it's not really brightening up the scene a lot. All we really see is that intense contrast that it's adding. And the reason I say that overlay and soft light are similar is because soft light is basically overlay, but not as strong. So just think of overlay as your really intense contrast adder, and then think of your soft light as just kind of the more mellow contrast adder. I mean, they're still both pretty intense, but so if we look at this is overlay, right? And then let's go to soft light. So overlay, soft light. Again, very subtle differences, but there is a difference there. So soft light, overlay. Soft light, overlay. Overlay. So if you're in Photo Raw right now and you're playing with some images, just kind of hover over these two and you'll see, oh, there's just a little tiny difference of contrast. I almost think that the soft light kind of removes some of the mid-tone contrast. That's just me. But if I go to this overlay, it looks like a lot of the contrast is added to these midtones. So I think soft light just kind of saves the midtones just a hair, but I could be wrong. Anyway, so that's the overlay and soft light blend mode. So perfect for adding in contrast. This scene in particular, obviously you might want to turn down the contrast, but this is without it. And then this is with 50% of it back. So you can see it's a really powerful blend mode, and again, just adds in contrast, which is a really important factor in a lot of images. So with this scene in particular, we could easily use some contrast in this area. It's a little blown out. Overcast days generally do have a little lack of contrast because there's not a whole lot of sun. So you can get away with this one pretty easily on some overcast days. If we do like maybe a brighter day type scene, it's a little harder to get away with, but you can always go back and again, modify the opacity. And you can also use different blend modes on top of each other. So if you wanted to add in a little bit of contrast, but also brighten the scene up a little bit, you can do that as well. So if I go and I add a filter, I'll do my curves thing, which I always do. I'll go to soft light, so I have some contrast. And maybe let's add a filter and let's do our curves again. And let's maybe make this one multiply, so it darkens. So now I have that really intense contrast and also that really intense darkening agent on my shot. But the cool thing about Photo Raw is that I can modify my effects tab in its entirety. So if I wanted to turn a blend mode onto these two filters that already have blend modes, I can go up into my effects tab, I can click on this gear icon, and now I can apply a blending mode to all of these filters. So let's say I wanted to brighten these up maybe, I could go down to screen, and now that's brightening all of these up, so I could just maybe, actually I probably don't want that intense, but I mean, you kind of get the idea. You know, it's like you can really start getting creative with adding different things and taking different things away. So yeah, really just kind of fun way to add in different styles and think about editing in a different way than you normally would. Yeah, that kind of looks janky, but again, just kind of a demonstration here. So let's add another filter. Let's do that curves again. And let me show you kind of how I would do a soft light blend mode. So I would go to my curves. I would use my soft light blend mode again. And so I'll go down to soft light, just like that. So with the soft light blend mode, if I turn this off and on here, I typically like contrast applied selectively if I need to, or if I'm applying contrast, I typically like to apply it selectively, especially in landscapes. So if I turn this off and on, obviously it's blowing out that sky area, and it's also adding in a little bit of crunch back here where we don't want it. So let's just apply this selectively by using our masking bug. I'll just hit M on my keyboard. That's going to grab me my masking bug. I'll go to my shape, and then I'll choose gradient. Preset, I'll just choose linear bottom because I want to remove it from the top. Then I can just drop this down like that. Now it's removed. Oh, added another one. So I can just pull that up a little bit. We'll feather it maybe. And now we've only applied this kind of soft light blend mode to the foreground, and it makes it look a lot nicer. Now we have a more cohesive scene on our hands. So I guess I'm just harking at, like, with great power comes great responsibility. So these blend modes sometimes can be very, very intense. So just make sure that you're thinking about kind of the original photo and what you were trying to achieve with that original shot. Because you can, again, get really crazy with these blend modes. And sometimes you won't even notice it. You'll just be like, oh my gosh, I added on all these weird adjustments and now I got this. But yeah, so just never lose sight of that original vision that you're trying to achieve with these blend modes. But again, they're super fun, so play with them a bunch. All right, so that's soft light. Soft light and overlay again, contrast, 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 contrast. So multiply darkens, screen brightens, overlay and soft light will add in contrast. Now let's move on to, let's see here. Oh gosh. Come on. There we go. Okay, so, all right, so hue and color. So hue and color are a really, really fun kind of pair of blend modes. So the hue and color blend modes are part of the color, I don't know if they're maybe color blend modes, I think. But anyway, these two blend modes, hue and color, modify color tones. Your hue blend mode strictly applies filters, adjustments, or layers to the hue of whatever color you're applying it to. Now, people often get confused between hue and color. Well, hue is the actual color. It's like the color with no grays, no blacks, no whites. It's just that color. So if you had like the yellow on a banana, that's the hue of that color, that yellow. If you had chocolate milk, if you had kind of just white milk, and then you went to chocolate milk, that's the hue of that white going from white to dark. That's the hue. So when you're thinking of these two blend modes, hue and color especially, hue is going to modify just the color. It's not going to modify any of those bright tones. It's not going to incorporate any grays. It's just going to modify the color. So it's a really helpful tool if you want to modify like the color of a shirt, color of a bag, the color of someone's hair. So it's really kind of creative in that way, products especially. And then with color, you're modifying the color again, because obviously it says the color blend mode, but with that, you're incorporating the tones that were already there. So if you pick the color blend mode and you want to change a blue to a red, when you're painting on that red, it's going to incorporate whatever grays and whites and blacks are in that blue into that red, which sounds kind of confusing right now, but let's just start with the hue and then we'll move on and you'll be like, oh, I get what he's saying. So hue blend mode, we'll go into our local adjustments and let's say we want to change this dress color to like a soft nude color. So let's just go, we'll paint with color, maybe use our little color dropper, and let's just paint it kind of the same color as this bag. Maybe let's go in here and maybe make it a little more, no, I want like a pink color kind of. Well, let's do like that, kind of like a, sorry. Actually, let's do that. That's kind of like a nude color. So that looks not bad like that. So with this color, actually that's kind of green. I'm sorry. Let's just choose a basic color. Oh, there we go. There we go. That's better. Okay. Sorry, that took so long. Okay. So now we're going to go up to our gear icon and we're going to choose a different mode. So in our mode, our blending modes, we're going to go down to hue. Now we haven't done anything yet to this adjustment or anything. We've just chose our paint with color and we have our solid paint option chosen. And so now if we paint on this adjustment, it's going to take over the color of whatever I painted onto. So actually, I'm sorry, I keep changing the colors, but I'm again just going to drop this on this bag just to make it cohesive. And then I'll just add in a little bit more red. Cool. So that's kind of the opposite of this blue, which is nice. So now with this hue blend mode, now watch as I just, with my adjustment brush, no perfect brush or anything, 100% opacity, as I brush this on. You can see immediately that that reddish color is taking over the scene. It's taking over that dress, but it's blending it in with just the hue. We're not taking over any of the, the tonalities of the dress. We're just modifying the color. So if we were to use the color blend mode, it would be mixing the grays and the whites and the blacks, and you could get a brighter color or a darker color. With the hue, we're strictly modifying that hue, just the color tone, not any of the middle grays, the blacks, or the whites. So really powerful tool if you're just wanting to modify, just like this, you know, just paint on like a different color for a shirt or something. So we just go in here, I mean, I'm not gonna go in too crazy, but you can get the idea of just how easy this is to do. You know, and it's just, look at that. We're literally changing her dress color. And that's kind of a bad paint, but sorry, I'm not in the lines a ton. And then we'll clean that up a little bit. But now look at that. It's like we just changed the entire color of her dress in a few brush strokes just by using that hue blend mode. Again, the hue blend mode is going to modify just the color. Just the color in the image. It's not going to modify any of the color grays or any of that. It's just going to modify that hue. So if I turn this off and on now, you can see immediately just takes over the color. So really, really great way to just switch up the color of a scene, switch up the color of a dress. And you could get, you know, pretty crazy with this too. You know, if you wanted to go like green, look at that. So it's, again, just taking over that color. So a really fun way to, you know, especially with product photography, if you need to maybe change the color of a yellow to more of an orange color or something, maybe make it more appealing. This is a great way to do that. These blend modes really help with that sort of thing. So that's the hue blend mode. Again, just modifies the hue, just the color, if there's color there. So if there was white, if this was completely white, this hue blend mode wouldn't work because there's no color there. So let's move on to the color blend mode. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate the two right now. We'll demonstrate the hue again and then the color. So we'll do color first. So let's do the same thing we did here, and let's just name this one color blend. And let's go down to paint with color, and let's try to maybe make this, take this orange and just put it on this pink. So we'll just go down to our color dropper. We'll drop it on the orange here, just like that. So we have that orange color. And now we'll go to our gear icon here, and we'll go to mode, and we'll go down to color. So by using the color blend mode here, I have this orange selected. So now watch as I just kind of brush this on freely. I'm not going to be too intense about staying in between the lines because it'll give you an idea of how this blend mode works. So again, the color blend mode is going to be blending in whatever adjustment, filter, or effect you have, and it's going to blend it into the color and all of the kind of whites and grays and blacks that are incorporated into that color, the entire color tone, basically, essentially. So as I paint this color blend on, you can see it's replacing the color really well. But I'm not strictly taking just this color. I can see that it's actually taking a lot of those bright tones in that pink, and it's incorporating those into my shot. So if I go down here and I paint this on to here, you can see it's really, really bright. Because again, it's taking those tones and those middle grays and whites in that color, and it's incorporating that into the blend. So let's turn that color blend off. And now let's go and we'll add an adjustment, and we'll turn this on, and let's go to hue blend. And we'll do the same thing. We'll click paint with color, use our color dropper. What do we drop about right there? So we'll just drop that. We have that orange, right? So now we'll go up to our gear icon, we'll go into our mode, and then we'll go to hue. So now keep an eye on just kind of the brightness and the overall tone of the color that I paint onto these two colors. And also keep an eye, so let's just turn this off real quick. And just keep an eye on the whites. So you can see that if I zoom in here, just by painting that on, even though there's not a whole lot of color in that white, it's still painted on that adjustment there. So that's another thing to keep in mind with that color blend mode. Again, it's going to apply this color or this effect onto the entire color tone in your shot. It's not going to apply it to the kind of luminance. It's not going to modify any of the like exposure or anything like that, but it's going to modify the tones in the color. So we'll zoom out here and we'll turn that again off. But you remember, you could see a little bit of that orange on the whites in the paper. So now with the hue blend mode, I'm just going to hit K on my keyboard again. And so paint with color and my hue blend mode, and we'll do the same exact thing. Again, just kind of pay attention to the tones of what each blend mode paints on. So now if I paint this on here, you can see that hardly painted anything onto the white because, again, there's not hardly any color in there. It's just, if it was strictly white, it wouldn't do a thing. And then watch as I go over here. It's even more dull. Because again, we're only modifying the hue of the colors in that tip of that marker. We're not modifying any of the tones in those colors. So we'll turn off the hue blend mode. Okay, this is hue. And then this is color. You can see it's about twice as bright. So those are just kind of things to think about whenever you're using one of the two. Hue is going to modify just strictly the color. Really great for things like I just showed you, maybe changing the color of a shirt. Whereas the color blend mode is better for changing things when you need to incorporate a little more liveliness into the tones of that color to kind of change the tonality of that color. This would be fun maybe on like a building, and you could also probably do it in product photography as well, but I would maybe stick to the hue at first just to have a little bit more control of those tones in those specific shots. So the hue blend mode, again, applies the filter adjustment layer to the color, specifically the color, that hue of that color, whereas the color blend mode applies the adjustment and effects to all of the tones in that color, as well as the color itself. That's kind of a lot to wrap your head around, but the more you use the two, you can kind of differentiate between what does what. So again, just playing with them helps, and kind of reading the definitions and just thinking about what the base look they achieve, and it'll really kind of help you with using them. So our last one here, I guess we're going to use this guy for two examples, but this is going pretty long. We haven't even gotten to the apply to menu yet. Oh well, this will be a good one. So for this guy, beautiful colored photograph, right? Tons of amazing colors in this shot. So Let's just pull up on the saturation a little bit, just a hair like that. So we have these beautiful colors in our scene, right, of this bird. And the next blend mode that I want to talk to you about is the luminosity blend mode. Now, the luminosity blend mode strictly applies the filter or adjustment or layer just into the luminance values of your image. So you're not modifying the color or any of the tones of the colors. You're just modifying the luminance of your photo as a whole. Basically, the luminosity blend mode is like your tone in your develop tab. You're only modifying the tone. You're not bringing out any of the color tones or anything like that. And the great thing about the luminosity blend mode, if you do modify specific tones that would normally darken a color, you're going to protect those colors. So if you darken an image, typically you're going to increase the saturation because you're increasing the contrast. Well, with the luminosity blend mode, you can protect those vibrant colors even when you're darkening things. So if I go over to my effects tab here, I'll add a filter. And again, I use the curves filter, but the curves filter is a really good filter, especially for the luminosity blend mode, because it's like the curves filter without affecting any of your color. So if I go to my blending options, I go to my mode, I'll go to luminosity. So actually, let's go back and we'll just do normal. So we're on normal. Oh, close that. So we're on normal here for now. And let's just maybe darken things up, maybe add in a little bit of kind of a cinematic look, if you will. So there we go. We kind of have this cinematic look. It's a little muggy, a little muddy, and we don't really see any of those color details, and they're a little kind of oversaturated and dark. But what we can do is if we go into our mode for our blending options, we'll just go down to luminosity. And again, it's very subtle, but let me just pull up on this image a little bit. So there we go. And let's just kind of do this again. So in this blend mode, if I pull up on any of these tones, you can see it's not modifying any of those colors in the shot. But if I had this at normal and I were to go in here, you can see if I pull down, it's darkening up all of those different colors. So let's just make it really intensely strong again, and you guys can kind of see. So if I go into here and I go to mode and now I go down to luminosity. So that's, I mean, again, it's pretty contrasted, but if we zoom in here, kind of just to these tones over here, and we go to normal, so that's normal, right? And then this is luminosity. So it's just protecting those color tones in your shot. It's only applying the adjustment to the luminance values. So if I add a filter, another good one to do this with is the LUTs filter. So let's say you like this kind of tone on your scene, but you don't like what it does to the colors, just go to your gear options for that LUT, go into your mode, and go to luminosity. Now we're protecting those colors within our scene, but we're also applying kind of that LUT tonality vibe with this preset. You could also do the same thing with color as well. So if I go in here and I'll reset these LUTs, and we'll do Brnag right this, and so you can see it kind of dims things down a bit, takes away some of the color tones a bit. So if I want to just protect the luminance in my shot and modify the color, so I'll go up to my blending options, I'll go to my mode, and then I'll just choose color. So now if I turn this off and on, I'm not modifying anything with the luminance or the tones. They're not bringing any of the values of the exposure up. I'm just modifying that color. So that's helpful if you want to dim down a color specifically within your scene without modifying kind of the brightness or darkness of it. But yeah, so those are just kind of a few ways that you can use those blend modes. Again, luminosity blend mode is great for just applying your filter to the luminance values, the tonalities of your scene, and then the color is great for just applying that filter or adjustment just to the color and the tones of that color. I know that was a lot in 50 minutes, but trust me, the more you play with them, you'll be like, oh, they're a lot more basic than you think. I mean, they're very complex things, but you can use them to do a lot of basic things in your photography. Okay, so last little bit, we have about 20 minutes here, so let's just jump right into the Apply To menu. I'm going to see if there's any questions real quick before I move on. So if you want to reset the curve, oh, I have a question from somebody, how to reset the tone curve. So if you add a filter here, we'll add the curves filter. I've been trying to get this added into Photo Raw for a long time, but it hasn't. But you can't actually remove individual things in here. So if you do this, you can't actually like right click it and move it. But the only thing you can do to reset the curve is just click reset, this little arrow. So just right there, do anything to it, just arrow, that little reverse arrow, that'll reset everything. One day we will have the points able to remove. Yeah, so let's move on to the apply to menu here. Let's grab a different photo and let's use this photo. Okay, so the apply to menu within a filter or an adjustment or whatever you're using is a great way to just apply things strictly to maybe a tone or a color and then have that blended in. So if I add a filter here, let's first start with a dynamic contrast mask. That'll be a lot easier to see. So the dynamic contrast filter, let's say we want this dynamic contrast filter applied to just this pink. So we'll click Surreal, right? So if we go in here, bada bing, bada boom, tons of dynamic contrast on our shot. Well, let's say we only want this dynamic contrast applied to the pink in our photo. Well, first we could do it with a color range mask. So let's try again that color range mask. So we'll click color range, and then we'll go in here and we'll click that pink again, like that. So again, if we view this, because we've chosen that pink, we have our pink. You can see we have that pink color. But again, it's adding in a little bit extra of the dynamic contrast into these areas where we don't want it. So if we go back and we view that photo and we zoom in here, we turn this off and on, yeah, it's applied to the pink, but it's also applied to this area to the right quite a bit, to the left, and this chord. So what I typically do in these situations when I'm just wanting to apply one tonal adjustment specifically to that tone is I'll reset this entire thing. Or no, let's just go in here. Let's rename this color range. So we'll turn that off, and then we'll do the same thing. We'll add a filter, dynamic contrast, surreal. Again, sorry this is taking so long. And then we'll go to our blending options, our mode, or not our mode, sorry. So we have surreal, right? And now we're gonna go into our blending options. We'll go to our apply to, and this time we're gonna zoom in, and we're gonna drop the same dropper, like this apply to dropper, on the same area that we dropped the color range. So I'll just drop it on this pink, right? So now that I've dropped that on there, remember with the color range mask, and we'll just rename this again, apply to. But if I hide the apply to, so we'll turn the apply to off and on. So with the apply to off and on, you can see it's strictly just applied, excuse me, to that area in here. And then if I turn this off, here's the color range. It's a little bit sloppier. You can see that this is applied kind of everywhere down here, but it's also applying over here to these cracks. And if I turn this off and I go to apply to and I turn this off and on, it's not applying anywhere out here. It's only applied into these tones inside of that pink because I've chosen that with the apply to menu. Now with the apply to menu, because I've chosen custom, I can go in here and I can increase the range, but it's a very subtle range slider, and I've kind of found that it doesn't do a whole lot whenever you're modifying tones like this. So that's kind of that trade-off. When you're using color range masks, you have a whole lot of control on that mask and how to use it. But with the apply to, you're really kind of stuck in that one tone that you choose. But the one tone that you choose is really nicely blended. So again, just personal preference on how you want to use them. Yeah, so let's kind of use these all in conjunction with each other. Let's go here. And now let's use the apply to menu with some blending options. So let's say I want to just modify the color of this pool a different color. Well, I'll go to my local adjustments. I'll click paint with color, and let's just choose this kind of nasty yellow. So we have this yellow here down on the bottom. And now let's go up to our blending options here, And let's say we only want this yellow color to be blended in with the specific color of blue that's there. So to do that, again, what are we going to use? The hue blend mode. So we'll go to our mode, we'll go down to hue, and again, this is strictly applying that adjustment only into the specific color of blues here. So I'm not going to be modifying any of these bright whites into the blues. It's just going to pull this color on there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use the apply to menu to really make sure it's applied to those blues. So if I use this hue and here, and I went in here and I painted this, it's going to just apply it to those blues, but whatever color it sees, it's going to paint that yellow onto it. So you can see it painted a little bit of yellow onto kind of these rails there, which I don't want. So I can go in here to my blending options, and I'll click this apply to dropper, and let's just drop it on this blue color right there. So we have that kind of custom blue color right there. And now I can just make my brush size as big as I want, and it's only going to paint onto those blues because that's where I've chosen that apply to menu. I've chosen, hey, photo raw, apply this to this specific area. And that's kind of what the apply to menu does. And so the more I modify kind of my range, you can see it's very subtle. So this is at 0 and this is at 100. Again, it's just very subtle, but it does help a little bit to just kind of maybe tone things down a hair. So if you wanted to maybe remove a little bit of that yellow right there, you could do that pretty easily. But you can see it does a great job of replacing that color, because we've used that hue blend mode to specifically apply that color to those blues or whatever color is in our scene. And then we've kind of specified where to apply the hue blend mode with the apply to menu. And then we've chosen our color with the paint with color. And we can always go in here and change up the color. So if you want to go in here and change it back to a blue, or you can make it a little more green tinted. I actually kind of like that green a lot. And so now we could do the same thing. We'll just name this one water, but we could do the same thing with the yellow down here. So let's just go to our adjustment. We'll name this one, well, not yellows, we'll just name it deck, like pool deck. So we have our pool deck here, and let's just click paint with color, and let's maybe paint it like a pinkish color or something. So now we have our pink color and paint with color. We'll go to our blending options, and all we're going to do, just kind of a couple different clicks, we're going to click our mode, and we'll go down to hue again. So we're only applying this adjustment specifically into the colors. Then we'll go to our apply to, we'll click on the color dropper, and then we'll click an area of yellow, just like that. So now, no matter how big my brush size is, it's only going to apply this adjustment into those yellows. So if I just paint this on, you can see it's only painting that pink on to those specific areas that I chose with the apply to menu. So this can be incredibly helpful if you're wanting to change you know, a specific hue, but it's kind of in a complicated area and you don't want to mask. But again, you can always go in here and modify the different colors. I kind of like, oh, I like that a lot. So even with just this on our shot, we've just done this. So if I click Z on my keyboard now I can add a filter. We can add a dynamic contrast filter. And then let's add a LUT filter. So now we have our LUTs. Let's say we like maybe this. Let's say we like these colors, but we don't like how it's modifying the tones. So we can go up here to our gear icon. We'll go back into the blending modes. And one blend mode that we can use to protect our colors and not, or protect our tones, is we can use the luminosity blend mode. So we'll just click luminosity. And now this is only applied to the luminance values. So now we're kind of darkening things up in our scene. And then if we just wanted it applied to the color, we could click color. And then it's only applied to those color tones. So just kind of a few creative ways to stay, or just a few ways to keep your editing kind of creative. Let me just show you one more way that you can use the apply to menu. And this way it's just make kind of colors pop out a bit. So in here, let's say we want to make these yellows pop out of this beautiful bird here. So we'll just go to add filter. I can use my color enhancer, and we'll just increase the saturation. And then let's maybe make our yellows brighter, like that. Or not brighter, more saturated, then we'll brighten them up like that. So Now we've obviously brightened up all the yellows in our scene. It looks pretty intense. And rather than using a color range mask and clicking in here to make our mask, we can just use our apply to menu again, click on our color dropper, drop it on yellows, and now it's strictly applied to those yellow tones. And again, I can always selectively apply anything. So I can, use my masking brush. I can remove these yellows, these really bright ones from outside of our bird here. But I mean, you can see just the kind of the power within these blending modes and these apply to options to really kind of fine tune your adjustments on your shot, and really just keep creative with your images. Okay, so that's basically all I have for you guys today. I know we kind of covered a lot in a short amount of time, but I hope you guys learned some blending mode techniques and tools, learned a little bit about the apply to menu. Thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it. Again, blend modes can be a little bit complicated, but just kind of keep to the basics of them and you'll learn them more and more the more you use them. So thanks for joining me again. Have a great rest of your week. Keep creative, stay editing, stay safe. Thanks again.